Thanks for stopping by the channel. Make sure you're subscribed. It's down there somewhere, and there's a little bell icon. As you can see, there's a stranger on the screen here. I have Carter from Unsafe Space. He is a wrong thinker par excellence, and I have been watching him and listening to him for quite a while. One of the first things I ever listened to Carter talk about was the situation out in Idaho when Lavoy Finicum was gunned down, and Carter shocked me because I hadn't really ever listened to him before, and really kind of broke down a lot of what I was seeing in that situation, and kind of laid it out for us that, hey, here's an example of something that should not be happening, and whether you agreed with Lavoy's position or not, it's pretty clear that it was a clear-cut case of, should we say, overreach would be a good way of saying it.
That's a polite way to say it.
Yeah, very polite, right? So Carter has some very interesting views, and I have to get this out of the way right away. I did not warn Carter I was going to say this. Carter and I should not be able to get along. We should not be friends. Carter is an anarcho-capitalist and a dreaded atheist. And yet we have had many conversations. We have interacted both on the phone, through text, and through different messaging platforms. And we have a camaraderie, if you will. And that's one of the things that has really, if you would go with me on this one, blessed me over the last year especially, is the way that people from varied philosophical and even religious or non-religious worldviews have been brought together due to what's happening here in the United States and even around the world as it regards the COOF and COOF restrictions and government overreach. And Carter has been a very strong ally in that regard. And one of the things that I have been interested in hearing him explain is his journey towards his current socio-political positions. And as his co-host, Carrie, who we will be having on when she can finally make time for us lesser people. Yes, Carrie, I'm calling you out right now. As Carter has grown through his life, he has come to what some people would at one point have considered a very radical position, which when you listen to it, it's not radical, and yet it's not easy to understand. And Kerry points this out often when he speaks about his political worldview. And so I'm like, hey, I'm going to chase Carter down, and we're going to have a conversation about how he arrived where he's at. So, Carter, take us away. Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you end up as an anarcho-capitalist, you crazy radical insurrectionist, you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I guess we should say I get, I just watched a video on Twitter from Anonymous, who I guess calls themselves anarchists in some way and physically threatening the mayor of Portland. So I know a lot of people use the word, they associate the word anarchy with, bedlam and chaos and, gangs of roving murderers and thugs, pillaging. And I can get into why I don't think that's necessarily what happens in anarchy, but I will say I like to use the term voluntarism rather than anarchy, because I think it's softer and it's more descriptive of where I'm coming from. When I say anarchy, I don't mean those things. I'm not like a punk rocker from the 80s looking to,
You
go
and
out
I
and
are
blaze a glory.
You and I are
not
still the new dissidents, by the way. So
right.
We are the radicals.
Right. I'm not, it's not that I want the chaos that people associate with anarchy and the lawlessness in that sense. It's that I think it's the moral system. But there's a caveat to this. And maybe this is why we get along. And why I get along with a lot of, I'll say, libertarian or smaller government type people. I don't think so Andrew Breitbart used to say famously say that politics is downstream of culture. And I think that's mostly correct. There's probably some feedback loops there, so it's not entirely that simplistic, but it's mostly correct. And I think that philosophy is upstream of culture. I think culture's downstream of philosophy. And
I love when you talk you talk about that a lot on your show. You
yeah,
quote that frequently, and I love that because that's really where I've been. So I like to hear you. So yeah, expand on that.
yeah. Well, so I guess, man, we could go down a lot of different angles here. A lot of times when people I think the word culture is overloaded. So when I'm going to use the word culture in this context only, I'm not meaning foods, art, musical preferences, things that are not part of a moral or ethical system. I'm meaning the parts of a culture that are derived from its underlying ethical system. And so, what makes radical Islam, for example, bad culturally isn't the food, it's that they toss gays off of the roofs of buildings. Like, it's the ethical system that's wrong, not the food or the art and unfortunately the word culture is a fusion of two dramatically different types of things. It's all these like aesthetic things that don't matter and all these things that are super important from a philosophy perspective.
We do that culturally a lot. We do that a lot with words, though. We really do. And I mean, I know you're familiar with deconstructionism, but we're in that phase now of society and culture where we're changing the meaning of words from what they were socially and culturally understood to mean within the context of a framework of linguistics and whatnot. So that I wrote an essay just last year about the word nice and how we now want everybody to be nice. But if you look at the historicity of the word nice, it actually was a negative. It was a negative. It was meant to be useless and had no positive connotation. And now we put all the connotation on a word like nice. So we do the same thing with culture. We have absolutely twisted culture now to mean if you don't accept everything about a particular culture, their food, their clothing, their identity as it is, then you've rejected everything about them for these shallow reasons, and therefore you're a bigot. And that's what I've always loved to hear you talk about, is the fact that no, I'm not rejecting the way you dress, I'm not rejecting what you eat, or how you interact at a bank or whatever it might be.
Right.
I'm literally
traditions you have, whatever.
I'm rejecting your ethics.
Yes.
So and that's I think is very valid, and I think that's the crux of what culture is your ethical approach to something.
I mean, I'd love to blame Derrida for everything, but I don't know that I can blame him for that particular word. My guess is culture's probably been a conglomeration of those concepts for quite some time. And I think even, I think you can trace this back to philosophy. One of the branches of philosophy is aesthetics. And I think we could argue that aesthetics does not belong in philosophy, like in its entirety, because psychology plays a role, and psychology is related to genetics and things that aren't philosophical. And so, like, I think, we do our best to come up with taxonomies and descriptions of the world, and, maybe aesthetics doesn't exactly belong in a purely philosophical realm. Maybe politics needs to take psychology into account, and maybe culture should be split in a way that it hadn't been in the past linguistically, and that's okay. I just want to be clear when I'm talking about the ethics. And so with respect to culture, I think it's self-evident, and we can talk about this if you disagree, I don't know, but I think it's self-evident that the political system is irrelevant I won't say irrelevant. The political system is much less important and subservient to the culture. And the examples that I'll give you, I think your audience will be familiar with. It doesn't matter what the Second Amendment says. If we've developed a culture in which we're willing to redefine all the words that are used to write the Second Amendment, and if we're willing to interpret things wildly because we want to ban certain things and, you know, we don't really care what's written there, we're going to interpret it the way we want, and we're going to deconstruct language or change words, we're going to redefine racism, which isn't a Second Amendment thing, but this is something you see a lot from the social justice community. We're going to redefine words and reinterpret things, and we're going to view it as a living constitution. Well, you know, what's written on that piece of paper, kind of irrelevant. Exactly. It's cool that it's there, and I agree with the founding fathers, but they can't, it's indefensible if it's controlled by, if the people that are reading it hate it, the paper can't defend itself. Does that make sense?
No, and yeah, exactly. And that's what I've emphasized a lot on, especially on my channel, is that like when I talk about the Constitution, when I talk about things like the Bill of Rights, I am not talking about the paper. I'm not talking about the things that are transcribed there, because, you know, and there again, and you and Carrie have talked about this quite a bit over the last, you know, many episodes of your program. The Judeo-Christian values that gave rise to something like the Constitution and this republic, they're not about what's on the paper. They're about the cultural conception of what things like liberty and the pursuit of happiness and whatnot. Those things exist apart from what's on the paper. And as you're saying, like, if I can then go in and say, well, because it says this and I believe these words mean this, I can now completely twist everything that's encapsulated in that document. And
right.
And what we have to get back to is not what's encapsulated in the document, but the thoughts and the reasoning and the logic that were brought to bear on those issues at the time that it was written, that led to it being encapsulated on that piece of paper, and what was their intent at the time, not what we say their intent was based on our understanding of words, but what they meant. And that describes a massive amount of everything that's happening in our culture on an ethical level today. I don't know, maybe, I don't think we disagree on it.
Yeah, no, I don't think we do. And the founding fathers did their best to write down. I mean, the only way they can transmit those ideas is to write them down. So they wrote them down. Like, they did the best they could. They wrote them down. They made them pretty clear. The Second Amendment, as an example, since we're using it, it's pretty damn clear. It's pretty damn clear in plain English. It's pretty clear. Yep. But nevertheless, we are willing to interpret it as the right, as granting the federal government the right to a bump stock ban. Well, I don't know where that comes from, but it's not the paper. And I do know where it comes from. It comes from the culture. And another example I'll give you is, imagine a society. Tell me where you'd rather live. Would you rather live in a monarchy in which everyone, including all the aristocracy and the king, had deeply held, almost religious reverence for individual rights and the sovereignty of the individual and protecting them?
Right.
Or would you rather live in a democracy in which everyone was an Antifa-Marxist?
Right. Exactly.
It's not the system of government that matters primarily. It's
right.
It's your community. It's the people around you. It's the people that control it. All systems of government are controlled by people. People have a philosophy, whether they've consciously identified it or not. They have a way of behaving culturally. They've got an ethical system, and that's what matters. And so, for me, the reason I'm allies with a lot of small government people is the most important question that I'm asking is, in terms of evaluating whether I'm on the same page with someone, is not what political system do they want. It's what do they think the goal of the political system is? Right. And if their answer is it's the preservation and protection of individual rights,
yep,
we're on the same page. We're on the same page.
Gentlemen, this has been the shortest interview in the history of my channel. Thank you very much.
That's the end. And I think the problem that we face right now is not primarily a political problem.
Right.
I would love to get to a point where Can you imagine in a United States in which we're all agreed that the goal is to protect individual rights, and we're arguing about the nuances of how much state there should be in order to do that? That would be a great conversation.
Right.
That's not where we are.
Yeah, right. Like right now, we're arguing about how much should individual rights be limited to expand the power of the state. That's.
I mean, we're not even talking about rights in general. In fact, we don't even know what the word means as a culture anymore. We use it to mean right to health care, right to this, right to that. We don't even understand conceptually. We don't understand the syllables coming out of our mouths as a culture half the time. And they're just garbage words designed to get the right people in power. That's all they are.
Right.
We're not even really having a discussion at that level.
One of the reasons why I have started to even in my own content and even in conversations with individuals on, in a face-to-face, in the real world, I actually have now really emphasized not using the word rights, and I speak almost exclusively about our liberties. The First and Second Amendment are not rights. We call it the Bill of Rights, but really what it is it's the Bill of Liberties. And that's what I've been trying to get people to understand. It's kind of like that fight that you have with people who, you run into the reactionary conservatives out there who are, those damn liberals, I hate them. I'm like, they're not liberals. What do you mean? Well, they're leftists. What's the difference? It's precisely. That's why we need to be having this conversation. And it's exactly the same when it comes to rights. We have got to stop talking about rights because every single person is going to define that differently based on their cultural worldview. And that's going to be rooted in their ethic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, although I still do like the use of the word rights. I would argue that the word liberty is just as vague, if not more so.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people,
Carter, they don't use it as much.
Fair. There's a lot of libertarian types who, and I consider myself a libertarian type, so to some extent I'm throwing myself under the bus here. But there's a lot of libertarian types who I would say they're seeking liberty from consequences and from reality, and that's not what that's not what political liberties are.
No,
yeah.
That's not. We've come a very long way from the understanding that liberty means being able to exercise your freedom to do something while also taking the responsibility for the outcome of that exercise. And that's been one of my biggest pushbacks against the libertarians, is that they literally want to be able to do whatever they want to do and not have to be held accountable for it, which ultimately ends up in a nanny state anyway. So,
well, I think the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, as much as I like the natural rights argument, rights are, or liberties, whatever you want to call them, they're social functions. Like, if you're on a desert island by yourself and that's where you're going to live your entire life, we don't need to have a discussion about what your rights or liberties are.
Right.
They only come into the context when there's other men around, other people around. And then your rights, or if you want to call them liberties, then the purpose of talking about them is they circumscribe what people are allowed to do to you or not. Right. Like, that's what they're for. They're social concepts. So, the idea that if we use the word liberty, the idea that you want liberty from consequences, well, you should have a liberty from someone else using force against you because they don't like what you're doing, but you don't have liberties from reality rearing its ugly head if you make bad choices, and no one can protect you from that. So I think even those words are just really horribly misunderstood today. That's probably intentional.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you on that. And that's the sad thing about the framework of where we find ourselves a lot of times is we are using words and trying to describe fundamental foundational concepts. Just in referencing the Republic of the United States, that 200 and some years ago, those words and those concepts were vastly different in how we understood them, as opposed to the vast majority of people today. And there again, that comes down to the postmodern. And I know you guys have talked extensively about, postmodernism isn't the whole problem. But whether you want to look at it from a postmodernist perspective or deconstructionism or, critical theory and the effect that has had on people's understanding of things as it's permeated into different areas of education, all of those things affect, there again, how we converse and how we understand.
Sure.
And I appreciate the fact that you say, like, liberty is just as twisted often as the word rights are. It's just one of those words I don't hear people using very often. So for me, it's a lot easier to insinuate that into a conversation with someone at a face-to-face, on the man on the street perspective than it is to, sit there and go, well, do you really foundationally have a right to health care? I mean, like, where do you find that? Like, show me where that's a self-evident truth, because
they're probably more open to you assisting with the definition of liberties than they would be with you assisting with the definition of rights. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned a couple of things, like, okay, you're a volunteerist, which often, people who are more, adamant, the anarcho-capitalism, but you're a volunteerist. Sure. You're more of a libertarian, very much dedicated to liberty, the execution of the Constitution as it was intended to be understood. But you didn't get there overnight. That's not, you didn't wake, like, as we said, recording. Right. You didn't just like wake up one day and go, "Oh, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I'm going to go burn a building down or something."
Right. That's which not anarcho-capitalists aren't allowed to do ethically, but okay. Unless it's their building, which I
right, exactly. And that's why I brought it up like that, because I was baiting you a little bit, and
I know.
So thank you. So, like, how old are you, Carter?
I'm 46.
You're 46. And you've been kind of in this position that you're in for a little while.
I mean, as an anarcho-capitalist, probably 10 years. As a libertarian, leaning 25 years, maybe.
Okay. So it's been a journey, but the brunt of it's been going on now for half your life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not someone who was ever convinced by socialism. So it's not like I had to, take a journey from Marx and figure out that he's an idiot. That wasn't like, I didn't need to do that. So that's good. Okay. I do think,
by the way, you can't call people idiots anymore.
You can't? You can't call Marx an idiot?
No.
He's more than an idiot. An idiot is very nice. I mean, his ideology led to the deaths of over 100 million people last century. So we can call him a monster if you want to be accurate.
See, I would be fine with that as well. So
okay.
So you were never in that camp of, you were like, hey, mom and dad, screw you. I'm going to go be a Marxist today, because you're not.
No. And I mean, I had my ways to rebel. But those weren't the ways. That's not how I did. And I was always very independent and very focused on, frankly, just from a very selfish perspective, like, I should be allowed to do what I want to do, and no one should be telling me what I can't do, and I shouldn't be telling anyone else what they can do. And I've also been very justice oriented. So when someone is wronged, it has always really viscerally angered me. I've always been really, really focused on justice. And as you know, social justice is a perversion of the term. Just as a hint for your audience, whenever anyone adds an adjective to a term, you got to ask yourself why. It means social justice. The reason you add an adjective is because it's not justice. If it was just justice, they would use the word justice. They're adding the adjective social justice because it's not actually justice. It's just a linguistic trick. They take a word that you associate with something good, like justice, they add an adjective so you associate the whole term with justice or something good, and then actually it's completely not that thing that you thought it was.
Right.
But
See,
Yeah, so
everybody
like
that
I said,
watches me, I'm not crazy. Carter thinks, well, you know what? Maybe we're both nuts. I don't know. So
maybe. So yeah, like I said at the beginning, the concept to me, the concept that the role of the government is to protect and preserve individual rights is not something that is new. Like that's been
Right.
with me for a long time. And basically my journey looked like really just an iterative process of trying to apply that consistently. And I got to minarchy that way, which is basically, small government libertarian. And then I got to this idea of, well, we really shouldn't tax people by force because that's just theft. And I don't know, like, how do you preserve individual rights by violating property rights? That seems you can't say you've got an institution that applies this principle and is here to protect this principle that they simultaneously violate. So I got to this point where I was like, okay, well, the government should be voluntarily funded. Okay. Is that possible? I don't know, but I'll be honest, I'd contribute. If I didn't have any taxes and I got to write on it, got to contribute to the government and say, this is for protecting me from commies in Cuba or whatever the threat was at the time. Sure. Like, there's valid things that I want them to protect me from. I pay homeowners insurance. Like, there's things I want protection from, and I'm willing to outsource that, and I'm willing to pay for it. So I got to that point, and then I got to the point of kind of realizing, well, this monopoly on the use of force is in and of itself a violation of rights. And that's kind of what led me to voluntarism. But I want to make a caveat about anarchy or voluntarism. I don't think we should go there tomorrow. I'm not advocating for anarchy. And the reason I'm not advocating for it is
I feel better.
yeah, right? It'll make you feel better. The reason I'm not advocating for it is because of what I brought up at the very beginning, which is this isn't about political systems. It's about culture.
Yep.
And I'm terrified of what our current culture would be like in an anarchist state. It would be a nightmare. I mean, it would be the
It would be Portland.
The fears
everywhere.
that all of the non-anarchists have about what, like, with these people, with this culture, with this 330 million person set of people in the U.S., it would be a disaster right now. I don't know what the right form of government is for our people right now. But I do know where we should go, and that is we should be moving our people to respect individual rights. We should be changing the culture so that we value individual rights or individual liberties. And once we get a culture that has the right values, then, and I'll be dead by then, so my grandkids can have this debate with your grandkids, then they can debate about what's the best way to do that. And I think ultimately, if you have a culture in which people respect individual rights, I think what you could do is end up slowly starting to reduce the size of the government, and people will be like, well, what if, I don't know, if we don't have an FDA, what will happen? And we'll remove the FDA and realize no one's dying. Things are okay. Okay, hey, I don't know, we remove this agency, what happens? And slowly it will shrink, and eventually someone will say the feared thing, what if the government doesn't build the roads? Maybe we could do that. Right, okay. But it turns out, roads will be okay, transportation will happen, and eventually, I believe, we'll eventually just get to zero government. But I'm not advocating, and I'm not asking people to wrap their head around that today, because if I look at my neighbor, I live in the Bay Area in California, if I look at my neighbors and think, if they're unrestrained by any sort of laws, I'm not sure that would go well for me.
No, you
right?
would be the first guy. You would be out of town, literally in a rail car. So,
right. So,
not that they would be able to
that.
operate anything like that, because it would all be corrupt. But
right.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't really get into political discussions. I don't really care too much about politics, except to the extent that it's reflective of our culture and the extent that I believe politics can have a positive effect on the feedback loop culturally. So, for example, I do care about Trump's presidential or the executive order that he had banning critical race theory. I think that was important. I'm sad that Biden removed it. And that's a political issue that has a cultural impact. Education is a political issue that has a cultural impact.
Well,
now,
let's explore that for just a second. You said
sure,
that it's
yeah,
a political issue that has a cultural impact, but is that really? Are we talking the executive order is a political issue that has a cultural impact, or was it in that situation? It was a cultural decision executed through a political position to fight against another cultural position. And I ask that very specifically because I don't, you're like, yes, exactly.
It's a feedback loop. So that's just why I'm saying the Breitbartian downstream thing is a nice metaphor, but it's not perfect. There is a feedback loop. Politics does affect culture in some way. And the example that I'll give that maybe most of your audience will understand most clearly is when we granted the government power over education, that had a massive cultural impact that we're still feeling. Now, there might have been a cultural reason for us to grant power to the government, but then that power itself created more of a culture in the wrong direction, right? So it's not that like, yes, the initial impetus for a political decision is largely culturally driven, but then that decision has downstream cultural effects which can feed back into government, and you end up with this vicious downward spiral. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. Sorry, I'm muting some notifications here because every time you say something really good I get a ding and I'm like, okay, either the heavens are approving of you right now or
censoring me
or censoring you. So I made the mistake of telling some of our mutual friends that I was having you on tonight, and so now they're all wanting to know when's it air? When's it air? Yeah. Is it going to be on their channel or yours? And I'm like, mine, and they're like, oh.
It doesn't matter where it is, guys. Go watch it anyway.
Because my tens and tens of viewers need this. So let's talk a little bit, because I feel like it needs to be talked about, because I just have a feeling that most people, and I'm going to be honest, the vast majority of people, even watching, my channel, and even the people who are going to stumble across yours through the next days and weeks and months in years to come, or however long we're allowed to do this before they round us up and put us away in the re-education centers, that are going to stumble across this, and I don't mean this to be disparaging, but they're going to be like, wow, I really like the things that TC says. I really like the things that Carter and Kerry are saying, and others. They're still coming at it from a reactionary conservative perspective, from that Fox News Republican mindset perspective of, oh, well, if somebody on Fox News says it, I agree with it, and therefore the other side is just evil and it's just wrong. And that comes from that place of not understanding how culture impacts everything else that's going on, but also how philosophical perspectives impact culture and move culture along that stream. And you had mentioned this, in the beginning. Philosophy, the philosophical perspective of the individual, and even groups of individuals, not in a collectivist mindset, but even groups of individuals, the philosophical perspective is incredibly poignant and very important. And there was a day when they taught that in schools, philosophy and why we believe what we believe and why we think the way we think. All of that was very much part and parcel of educating young folk, period, up until the bastardization of the government school system. And I know you and I agree on that as well. So, but do you believe that it became easier for a lot of the things that we see happening now, culturally and politically, whatever word you want to use there? Do you believe it's has become easier for those things to be, for lack of better terminology, kind of foisted upon us as a cultural America, a societal America, because it was calculated that way, or it was just kind of a happy coincidence for those people who are now kind of seizing the reins of power? Does that make sense, what I'm trying to ask?
I think so. It's funny because sometimes when I talk about the impact of philosophy, I sound like a weird conspiracy theorist. It's like that who's implying that 300 years ago there was some huge conspiracy set into motion and like these dominoes fell over and here we are. And I'm not meaning it in that respect. I don't think there was a planned conspiracy. But I do think there was, for lack of a better metaphor, an evolutionary process of like-minded people. So someone got away with spouting some bad philosophy. The next generation latched onto that, saw what they got away with, modified it a little bit, made it a little bit worse. Like there's bad people always, and there's always psychologically dysfunctional people. I mean, Immanuel Kant was paranoid that his socks would fall down and rigged little like strings in his pocket so he could pull them up during lectures. I mean, these people are insane, right? And yet they're the people that that academics turn to. So I think two things have happened that have made us vulnerable, though. One is
that Immanuel Kant image. Now I'll never get that out of my mind.
I mean, what a pathetic individual. And he also wrote intentionally. Go try and read Critique of Pure Reason. He's like the Judith Butler of yesteryear. He's intentionally obtuse and confusing, and he's just trying to justify stuff that he starts with a goal in mind and then writes a voluminous, incomprehensible gobbledygook in order to justify it. And then, 200 years later, PhD students are getting their,
they're writing their
voice for quoting him. And yeah. So
anyway, before I sidetracked you and took you down that bunny trail.
Sure. Well, so there's two things that I think that happened predominantly. Maybe three if you include the snuffing out of religion, but let's put that on the side for a second.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that because a lot of my fan base is going to go, well, he's an atheist. Doesn't he want religion snuffed out?
We can talk about that, but I'm going to put that one aside for a second and just say two secular things that happened. One was, this is going to sound weird, but we abandoned medieval education, and medieval education was superior.
Yep.
From its goals were superior. Yep. Go read about the trivium. The purpose of medieval, obviously they didn't know as much. Like, I'm not saying it was superior in the sense that you came out knowing calculus. You didn't. There was a lot of weirdness and ignorance going on in the Middle Ages. However, they understood that the primary point, the most important part of education was in teaching kids how to think.
Yep.
And the trivium is designed to do that. It's designed, and could we update it? Sure. But the trivium was designed, it was, you start with grammar. It also maps on to the age at which memorization and that kind of stuff is something kids like to do. So you start with that grammar structure so they can understand things. And grammar shows up in a variety of subjects. I mean, there's grammar to chemistry. There's grammar to everything, right? You move on to logic, which is, hey, how do you actually think in a non-contradictory way and make sure, and how do you identify logical fallacies? And that maps to the age in which kids are, maybe some parents would say at the annoying phase where they start questioning a bunch of stuff and challenging, but that's good. You want to give them the tools to do that. That's where their mind is. They're learning how to think at that point. And then the last part of the trivium is rhetoric, which is really about and that maps the age of more later teens, where they're more mid to late teens, where they're more expressive and they're practicing with expressing who they are and what they think. And that's how you convince people of ideas. And those, and the trivium really sets you up to be able to learn how to learn. And then if you need to go study other things, you know how to dive in and study. You can parse a grammar. You can apply logic. It's a perspective on education that assumes that there is a universal oneness to knowledge in the world, and that chemistry is not divorced from math, which is not divorced from music, which is not divorced from English or Mandarin, which is not divorced from biology. They're actually all parts of a big truth. And integrating that truth together is important, and knowing how to navigate it and learn different things, whatever you fancy or whatever you want to do in life, is very important. We've completely abolished the trivium. We've substituted we maybe do a little bit of grammar if you're lucky. And we've substituted the trivium for this disjointed subject-based thing. We're going to teach them math and physics or social studies or history, whatever the
like
kids.
To add that physics is not science; it's math. And when they told me I should take physics because I like science, I got really mad.
I love physics, but it's because it's math.
Right? See, that we will
except
have more
for P-Chem. Physical chemistry is like there's chemistry in physical chemistry, and nuclear chemistry involves a lot of physics, but
that's still math.
Anyway. There's a lot of math in it. I agree. I've definitely got turned around trying to calculate the position of a particle in a well.
So the trivium takes learning. Ultimately, trivium takes learning, and it incorporates it all, and says, like, you can't have philosophy and reasoning apart from math, and math can't work without philosophy.
Right. In fact, math is just a special case of logic.
Right.
It's logic applied to numbers in this context, right? It builds. It's the focus of the trivium is to build autodidacts,
right.
And instead of doing what we should have done, which is to take that trivium and say, okay, as we learn more about the world, as we learn more about pedagogy, how can we update the trivium with keeping the same goal in mind, recognizing the value in it, and if there's things that need to be updated and changed, sure, it's several hundred years later. There may be things that need to be changed, but it's been instead completely abandoned. And I think we are now a population of people who can't think. I mean, just go read YouTube comments, right? You can write, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. And someone will write a YouTube comment that's like, I don't believe that Socrates is mortal. It's like, your belief is irrelevant. You're just a moron. You don't know how to think. That's not an argument. It's not a counter argument. It's just an assertion, right?
They would probably argue that Socrates wasn't a man instead.
Yeah, maybe. Nowadays, yeah. How dare you say man? How do you know he was a Zer?
He's not here to defend himself. So
right. So that has given bad ideas really rich soil to be planted in. Because people just can't tell the difference between bad ideas and really horrible ideas. And then the second secular thing that I think has happened is I blame philosophy. As much as I like philosophy, I blame philosophers. In my view here, and I don't think this view is not unique, but it's unique to it's semi-unique to the past couple centuries, maybe. And there are certainly were philosophers who agree with me, but the purpose of philosophy is to help explain, to tell man, to teach man, to figure out man how to live on Earth. It's a practical endeavor. It's not to sit around, get high, and contemplate the existence of the ceiling. That's not what philosophy is about. It's about helping you understand. I mean, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, those are three super important and relevant and practical branches of philosophy. They're the core branches that matter a hell of a lot to how you build a society, how you live your life, how you do anything. They're super important. And instead of treating philosophy as if it's something that is intelligible to people and should be, and practical and useful, we developed a class of philosophers who have turned philosophy into a joke. When average people hear, I'm getting my PhD in philosophy, if some guy says, I'm getting my PhD in philosophy, the average person assumes that they're just babbling crap that's useless all day long. And you know what? That average person is right. Philosophy has become this ridiculous argumentum ad absurdum, like reductio ad absurdum. It's just this, like, they'll literally make arguments like, well, because we have to see reality, we have to perceive reality by some means, therefore the means that we perceive reality is flawed, and therefore we don't know anything. It's like, you just made a statement, you just claimed to know something, and you're trying to impart knowledge to me and simultaneously claim that we can't know anything. It's just absolute absurd ridiculousness. And, we mentioned the postmodernists earlier. The postmodernists, in my opinion, built linguistic nuclear weapons. And they justified this by saying, well, we're just playing with words. We're just having fun. We don't think any of this applies to reality. Don't worry. I know this all sounds nonsense, but we're just playing linguistic games. You're not supposed to take it seriously. And by the way, why do we have any subject in a university that you're not supposed to take seriously other than comedy? Like, I don't get. But okay, hey, we have an entire subject. Don't take us seriously. We're just playing with words. Oh, okay. But sooner or later, some critical theorists / Marxists are going to come along and pick up those nuclear weapons and go, hey, this works really well for this use I need over here. Boom. And they're going to press the button. And that's what's happened. They've picked up postmodern weapons, which should never have been built in the first place, because they're built on a load of crap. It's absolute crap. I mean, none of this makes it's really frustrating. Just look into it. Just go read it. It is absolute crap, but it has this patina of validity because it comes from universities, and it's people write papers, and they cite each other's papers, and they reference papers from generations ago, and it seems to be some kind of academic knowledge, and one thing's built upon another. It's all a house of cards. It's all crap. It's utter crap. But because it has this patina of validity, evil people with evil ideologies can come along, pull this weapon off the shelf, and nuke us with it. And that's what they do. Yep. This is what they're doing, for example, to gender, right? Yep. Like, they are nuking the concept of, in biology, there is no more clear binary, like bimodal distribution of any attribute in any living organism. It's like the most stark binomial or bimodal distribution you could see is two sexes. Doesn't exist. And they use postmodern tools to say it doesn't exist.
It's exactly why, and I pointed this out to my dear wife, who has the patience of Job, last night as we were watching something on television, and a commercial for birth control came on, and I said, it's funny. Every person in this commercial for birth control is clearly male or female.
How dare you?
I know. I'm sorry. There were no like same-sex couples. There was nobody that was clearly transgender. Like, there was no male to female person who was being shown taking this new birth control or using this new birth control, and it's exactly what you were saying. Is like, it's very clear, and it's very substantive. It's tangible. You can literally sink your teeth into it, and you don't even have to wrestle with it. It's just there, and they know it's there, and they'll operate on it the way they have to, while rejecting it out of hand, because their worldview, their philosophical perspective, demands that they reject it at the same time while living with it. It's some of the most egregious examples of cognitive dissonance you will ever see, but even that doesn't matter to them anymore.
Yeah, it's important to understand that even the worst violators spouting this nonsense can't actually live by the principles they state. There are people who would argue 2 + 2 is, blue. Like, they don't, they live by these, they claim this ridiculous position. But, when they wake up in the morning, they don't walk out of a 4-story building out the window because gravity is only a construct, right? Obviously, they know gravity is not actually just a construct, no matter what their PhD thesis says. They go to the stairs because they don't want to die. So these people are fundamentally hypocrites because they can't live their life actually believing what they say fully. They've got to violate it because it's wrong.
So that addresses that addresses one aspect of the three things that you think have been a problem. So that's why I love talking with you, because this could go on forever, and it's just fun for me because it's so nice to talk to somebody who I agree with on most things. So we have this philosophical problem because we've dismissed the three major branches of philosophy, and we don't really operate in those now. We don't.
To be clear, we haven't dismissed them. We've corrupted them.
Well, okay, we've corrupted them. Thank you.
They still talk about metaphysics and epistemology. They just make them nonsense.
Right, and they make them mean next to nothing.
Yeah.
And so we've got the corruption of philosophy, and you said there's a second secular perspective that's. Oh no, you addressed both of them: education. And
although you're making me think of a third one, so I'll throw it out there since we're making space for it. I don't know. I'm just. This is all off the top of my head. This is not something I prepped to talk about.
I know, that's why I told you I'm conversational. So, and dude, I got until like 4 a.m. your time. So you just keep rolling.
Oh, I will keep going because I think the third one is important.
So lay it on me, bro.
I am slowly coming to the conclusion, and I'm not the person who noticed this, so don't give me credit for it, but I am slowly coming to the conclusion that the social justice ideology that we see, yes, it's made possible only by we talked about the educational problem. Yes, it's bad philosophy that enables it. I think there's a third thing that really provides fertile soil for it, which is, I'll just say, psychological failure, like the psychological dysfunction.
Okay.
Psychological dysfunction.
I've never seen you be that careful. And
no, I'm not trying to be. I'm just trying to be accurate. I'm not trying to worry about censors. I mean psychological dysfunction. The social justice crowd. I mean, Josh on the Disaffected podcast talks about this, but also Coddling of the American Mind talks about this. Jonathan Haidt's book.
Is Disaffected the one that talks about social justice from the perspective of things like bipolar disorder and narcissistic personality disorder? Okay.
Yeah, he talks about it, and Coddling of the American Mind talks about some of the psychological, some of the psychological state of many Americans today, and how we got there. So I think there's been an acceptance. There's been not even just acceptance. I would say there's been a positive bias towards psychological dysfunction. There's been a great enabling of psychological dysfunction. And while I think it is important to be cognizant of some of the aspect, like psychology is a weird, it's not even a science. It's a weird discipline because it's very nascent, and there's a little bit of validity to some of it, at least in terms of its description of people. But the why behind it is basically unknown almost completely, and it's full of a lot of theory, and it also likes to present itself as if it is way more academic and scientific than it actually is. So it pathologizes diseases, quote, it calls them diseases. It pathologizes behavior that and categorize it as a disease or an illness, which removes personal responsibility and agency from your actions. And it does this in cases, look, some cases you can stick someone in a functional MRI and see there's something wrong with their brain. Okay, I'll accept that's physical. But in most of these cases, in a lot of these cases, you can't tell the difference physically from someone with a mental illness. and an asshole. Like, there's no distinction. And what we've done, and you see this is one of the, it's kind of peaking right now. You see people in their Twitter profiles brag about their psychological dysfunctions. I have ADD and bipolar and blah, 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 struggling with X, Y, and Z. Like, it's their identity. And it's been given to them as an excuse. I'm no longer responsible for behaving like a mature adult because I have blah, 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 blah. You have to treat me with kid gloves because I have a condition. And that, I think, if you look at the social justice community, and this is what the Disaffected podcast talks about, you see a lot of traits that are cluster B personality disorder traits in that community, and it's uncanny. And once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. It's really weird. And so, I look around and I think
it's like
we've got a hell of a lot of dysfunction psychologically in this country.
It's like watching the arrest reports for Antifa and noticing that about 75% of them are all child sex offenders.
Yeah. Right. And so
I know that's a horrible analogy. Somebody's going to get mad. I'm going to get canceled. But
no, that seems to be, there's a lot.
But I understand what you're saying. And here's the thing. So like, there are several people in my life who I care deeply about, who struggle with exactly what you're talking about, who are like, okay, I don't feel right. I don't feel right. And I don't like the way I feel. And I don't want to make an excuse for myself, like who literally struggle with this. And then they talk to other people and they're like, oh no, you can't help the way you feel. And they're like, well, I get that. Okay. We feel the way we feel, but I don't want an excuse in my life to not better myself. And if,
right.
In what I see very often in our culture and our society today, and I'm glad that you brought this up as that third secular stream of where we've gone wrong in our society and our culture, is that instead of saying, okay, maybe this is a real thing, maybe we can't understand it. I mean, we didn't used to be able to understand, cancer and what did they used to call tuberculosis consumption. We didn't understand, tuberculosis and consumption, and we, the Doc Holliday from Tombstone, you dirty lunger. We just didn't understand what they were dealing with, and so we may at some point scientifically and medically get to a place where we can understand and explain why some people have these mental health and psychological apparent disorders, and others we may find out that they were just mimicking traits that they'd seen in other people or that have been foisted on them. But it has been used, and I think this is what you're saying, it has been used to excuse really bad behavior, and not have to hold people accountable for it.
Yeah, and there's a set of ideas that's presented to people that allows them to wallow in their dysfunction rather than correct it. So I'm not saying I don't believe these dysfunctions exist. Like, obviously, these dysfunctions exist. They're not necessarily medical, and talk therapy does work. Like, cognitive behavioral therapy does work in certain percentages of some cases. Like, there is progress you can make. And instead of calling them behavioral problems, and which puts the onus of correction on the person who has the problem. Like, if I'm an alcoholic, which, by the way, actually does have like
clear chemical issues and physical
right
issues, yeah.
That actually is right, but even so, if I'm an alcoholic, I know a lot of times we'll say, oh, they're an alcoholic, and we kind of forgive them. However, we still put the onus on them to go get help. We say, you should go to AA, you should go to this program, you should do this, blah blah blah. We provide support and help, and we expect them to take care of it. And we don't, if a guy beats his wife because he's drunk, we don't say, well, he's an alcoholic, so what do you expect?
You're just going to have to accept it. That's what's
right. But we do that with a lot of these mental illnesses, and we have the social justice ideology is almost tailor-made to fit with certain psychological dysfunction in order to enable it, in order to prevent you from having to take personal responsibility for problems in your life. It's one of the things that you'll see is common in the social justice psychology is this outward facing focus. The focus is never on, like, everyone's dissatisfied with something in the world and in their life. The social justice warrior never turns that lens inward, and never, I won't say never, but rarely turns that lens inward and says, what am I doing to create these problems? How can I make myself better? What are my issues? How can I work on myself? They always turn the lens outward, which is, what can I make you do? You're upsetting me. You're triggering me. Like, maybe if you get triggered by someone mistakenly misgendering you, and that causes you to go into a rage, maybe you need therapy.
It's
You don't need a law to tell them to not do that. You need therapy. That's not a healthy response to an insult.
Right. I'm sorry. It's just when you said that, when you get triggered by somebody misgendering you, I could think of was the guy at GameStop.
That's what I was thinking of. The guy at GameStop.
Yeah.
Really, I guess girl, we're supposed to say lady, right? But whatever. The guy at GameStop.
I don't care where you are in that process. That was not a lady.
Right. Right. And so it's totally reasonable to misgender. And that reaction, his insane reaction,
was not the problem with the people at GameStop.
Yeah, it's his problem. Someone needs to take him aside and say, dude, or if they want to be nice, lady, you need some therapy. Like, people are, look, you want to know what it's like to be ostracized and, like, hated? Be an anarchist, like, be a voluntarist, be a libertarian, and go to San Francisco. Like,
or just be me. Honestly.
Yeah, everyone has insults hurled at them.
Yep.
Like, we're called. I've been called a Nazi and alt-right and all this crap. Like, I'm constantly being insulted. I'm not running around saying you can't call me that because you hurt my feelings. I know you hurt my, like, I know your goal was to hurt my feelings. And if it really, really bothers me, that's my problem. You might be an asshole for doing it, but it's still my problem. If I'm that upset about it, I need to examine myself, not run around arguing that you shouldn't, say mean things to me. I mean, I don't think you should call people who aren't Nazis, but I don't think there should be a law against it.
Right. I'm going to have Beverly watch this when this premieres so that she can start the swear jar for my channel.
Yeah. Sorry. I didn't even ask if I'm allowed to swear.
No, you do you, man. I'm not gonna.
All right.
I don't want you to stop as you're saying something and try and come up with the right word, because that can throw off the whole. So now we've got these three streams that have been corrupted, or are leading to the disaffected way that we're handling things. So education, I agree with. I actually did some commentary about that the other night, talking about the lack of teaching of reasoning and logic in schools today, and why we need to be addressing that. That's the best weapon to me of the conservative, of the libertarian, of the patriotic constitutionalist is logic and reason. That's our best weapon, because they don't know how to operate with that. Because
you inoculate a kid. A 12-year-old can learn basic logic, and then they're inoculated.
Yep. And then we've got the corruption of philosophy, so that now, instead of thinking rightly through ethics and epistemology and metaphysics, we've corrupted those so much that now they don't mean anything, and you can philosophize whatever you want and make it sound right. And then now you're exploring this idea of what does psychological disordering, what role does it play in the way society and culture is operating today? And I think that one's really important. I think we should certainly, as we go forward from this point and where we are in our culture now, is definitely something we should be talking about. And I've actually been talking about that with people quite a bit. But
by the way, I don't know a lot about it, but, like, this is sitting next to me and on my to read list, this Handbook of Diagnosis and Treatment of DSM-5 Personality Disorders. I do want to understand it, because I do think it is very important.
Oh no, and I have many of those manuals around my own home, I have someone in my family who's just absolutely absorbed into, like, I believe he can actually quote directly from the DSM-5 on things. So people are like, "Where'd you go to school?" He goes, "I just read." But um, but the one that really there again, I think a lot of the people who know me, and this won't surprise you because you and I've had quite long conversations about this in the past. You very specifically said that one of the streams that has caused a lot of what we're dealing with today culturally is the emphasis on destroying religion.
Yeah.
And I can only assume you mean that's a negative.
Yeah. Well, so there's. I should explain it a little bit, but
you hypocrite.
Yeah, no. I get why people can't stand atheists generally. I mean, most atheists, let's be honest, something like 95% of atheists are Marxists. Like, no one, like, they're horrible.
They don't even know why they're atheist, honestly.
I don't, who knows? But, I mean, actually, that's another thing that I really can't stand about the atheist community is they convinced everyone that the logical system was Marxism, which is like during the 20th century, we were told that, well, if you have a system based on reason, it's communism. It's like communism has nothing to do with reason. It completely denies, like, deductive reasoning needs to start with premises. You can't start with false premises and then get yourself to anything that makes any sense. It completely denies the nature of man, motivations, individual rights, like all these things that matter. It's like a complete denial of those. And then I guess maybe it logically follows after that, but like that doesn't make it a rational system. It pisses me off.
You mean there might be a book that we've all recently read in the last year that, one of the secondary characters kept telling his students to check your premises.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Right. That book made me that book was my beginning of my path to being an atheist, actually. But yeah, what the atheists did, and I think it was, if I'm going to be generous, it was gross negligence. Now,
wow, that's generous.
that's generous. Yeah, but what the atheist philosophers did was they looked at religion and they decided to try and tear it down. Right? They decided to try and disprove religion and convince everyone it was bad and wrong.
Are you thinking Nietzsche or
Nietzsche was a little bit more descriptive than proscriptive, but sure, Nietzsche's a fine person to think about, right?
Who would you give us an idea, just briefly? You don't have to go into their philosophical perspectives, but just give me a couple of names. See if.
Well, I mean, if you want to look at modern people, I think you're looking at a lot of the postmodernists and the critical theorists, right? You're looking at everyone from Gramsci on the critical theorist side to Derrida or then Foucault. We'll stop at Foucault on the way and then go to Derrida, right? But they weren't making like a lot of overt atheist arguments, frankly. But Nietzsche was doing more of that. But there definitely was a disdain for religious arguments and religion in general coming from the philosophers. And the problem with that is, and I'm saying this as an atheist, religion, at the very least, if you don't like anything about religion, it at least gives you some metaphysics, some epistemology, and some ethics. Now, I might argue with them, but let's just pick on what for this conversation is the most important part, which is the ethics.
Right.
The ethics, again, I don't want to offend Christians, but this is how I think of this as an atheist. The ethics I view as an evolutionary adaptation of the religion. Like when you get people together and you need them to survive and thrive as a community, certain ethical systems work and certain ethical systems don't. You die out because of internal problems, or someone invades you, or whatever. Like the best ethical systems are going to evolve over time. And when I say best, I mean the ones that will keep that group surviving and together, right? Like, we don't worship Thor anymore; they're dead, so that wasn't working as well, right? Like, you kind of make that argument.
Or they're all in prison gangs. So
you maybe, I don't know, yeah.
That's literally
or the Greeks had a bunch of gods.
Yeah.
Right? But monotheism turned out to be, for lack of a better word, just evolutionarily superior as a functional system.
I don't think any Christian would ever. Well, I won't say that. There would be some sort of fundamentalist out there. I'd be very angry that you would couple the word evolutionary with that. But
I know, but
there's there's a reality to the evolutionary process in ideas. It's just a reality, and and you've heard me say I critique Christians more than I do atheists. I love talking to, and when I'm out on college campuses talking to people, I'd much rather talk to an atheist than talk to most Christians, because they're all about their feels and their own personal perceptions. And then a lot of the atheists are like, they really want to engage philosophically. Now, they have some philosophical struggles, I think, on some things, but so there is a reality to an evolutionary process to religion in that, there's going to be some adaptation. There's going to be some change in the thought process, and I think that affects ethics.
Well, yeah. I mean, ethics. think about if one of the 10 commandments was, this is a ridiculous example, but like, thou shalt never cook your meat. Well, that population would die out. Like, that probably wouldn't work. Like, if that was a rule, that rule would kind of suck.
Except for sushi.
Okay. And what?
Except for sushi. So.
Yeah, you don't have to cook sushi. Although, don't let it sit around for too long before eating it. It's got to be fresh.
Thou shalt eat your sushi fresh.
Right. But if you can have bad rules that actually are clearly don't work.
Right.
And you have rules that do work. And it's not, I don't think it's an accident that the major religions that are even today still active, even old ones like Buddhism, like, none of them condone murder. Like, I know there's an argument that Islam condones murder. Let's put that aside for a second. Right. But like, none of them condone, like, hey, go on a rape and killing spree. Like, that's not part of a thing that survived culturally in religion.
Right.
Because that doesn't work, to be clear. That, like, if you wanted to start a religion doing that, it wouldn't work. Your society wouldn't work, right? So
I would eventually run out of people. So
yeah, right. Yeah, someone with better ideas would come over and maybe prevent you from killing people because they thought that was bad.
But you won. Your religion is the only religion of the world, and you're the only one.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
So I guess
good luck procreating. Yeah. So I think what the atheist philosophers did largely was they tore down religion with gusto, and they didn't bother to replace, even work on, or try to replace the ethical system with anything resembling what we know works. Mostly they didn't try and replace it with anything. They were like...
That happened. The perfect example is the French Revolution.
Right.
Well, I mean, I don't, and this, I'm not, there again, I don't want to offend my atheist friends, like all four of you. But that's the stark difference between the American War for Independence and what happened during the French Revolution. It was the ethics that were driving the Americans to fight against tyranny were vastly different and far superior to the ethics of the atheists that sparked the French Revolution. And we saw how that ended. And they literally, it got so bad, they literally built another religion to replace Christianity as they drove it out of France, or trying to drive it out of France.
Yeah,
It-
that
because-
religion didn't last long, but they did.
No, well, I think somebody got beheaded over it. I don't. It was.
Yeah, the religious leader. But yeah, I mean, the French Revolution. I think de Tocqueville makes this argument about the French Revolution that fundamentally it was more. He makes an argument that it was not really a political revolution. It was more of like it had more religious revolution characteristics to it, and that
I would not dispute that because I'm not going to argue with de Tocqueville. So
yeah, well, he makes this argument, and he says that actually they went after the Christian institutions first, but he also links it to politics by saying you got to understand at the time the Christian institutions were the government institutions, and so attacking Christianity was a way to get at the political institutions they wanted. And you will notice about the French Revolution, as soon as that was done, as soon as they had gone through all their problems and Napoleon was over and like, okay, we're gonna put our sane hat back on a little bit, or as much as Frenchmen can be sane.
And there goes at least one of my viewers.
Right. Sorry.
No.
By the way, my favorite General Schwarzkopf quote is going to war without the French is like going hunting without your accordion. Anyway, they put their sanity hat back on, and what did they do? They went right back into Christianity. They welcomed it back, and like it was attacked insofar as it was part of the political institution, but it was attacked pretty severely and ideologically. And as you mentioned, what's his name? I forget the guy's name. Was it Robespierre? I think it was Robespierre who who had the new religion. I forget. He called it like the sun. Damn it! I forget the name. Like some universal being or whatever. It wasn't
something about the sun or something. I don't know.
It wasn't Christian.
So I'm going to ask this because I know you'll be honest. Do you? And I'm biased. I'm not like duh. Like anybody who comes into any conversation and says, "Well, I don't have any preconceived notions," like you're a liar. So, and you know that about me. I'm not that I'm a liar, but that I have preconceived notions. But
I also know you're a liar. That's fine.
Well, and you're right. So, and there's your Christian heritage coming into play. Thanks, Carter. So here's what I do. Would you say that it wasn't religion in general that the atheist philosophers were really pushing against, but they specifically targeted Judeo-Christian thought?
Yes,
predominantly, and that was.
But that was because, yeah. But I think it's for the same reason that the French Revolution targeted it.
Because it was predominant.
Yeah, they viewed it as, and they correctly viewed it as part of the socio-political system.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that's fair. So what I see today, and there again, I write about this on my other website, and you'll notice that 98% of my critiques, even on this channel, are leveled against Christians who are just absolutely disconnected and not disaffected. They're just disconnected and uninvolved. I mean, like literally the one religion that you literally should not be able to be part of and be an adherent. And I'm speaking of logical fallacies, it's not a no true Scotsman fallacy, but you just cannot be a true Christian and adhere to anything within social justice the way it's done today. And yet, what do you see? You see churches dropping just left and right to this ideology.
I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention went social justice.
They tried. They're getting it's going to.
Oh, are they winning now?
There's going to be a split.
Oh, good.
I got somebody I could connect you with that you should have on your show. Trust me.
Oh, my information is like a year old. The last time I looked at it, that was
there's a split coming, and I'm not a Southern Baptist, but there's a split coming. But what I push against Christians on is really kind of what I appreciate you about pushing with atheists on, is that I would never say that the United States was tacitly a Christian nation, but I would also never say that it was ever set up to function when it comes to religion apart from its Christian heritage. And, de Tocqueville even said that when America ceases to be good, read that moral, America will no longer be great. And the more that we've had foisted on us that, and there again, not pointing at you, but a lot of that, just that radical atheistic philosophy that has done its level best to get us to say, well, you don't get to bring your religion into the public square. You don't get to bring your Christianity into education and whatnot. Christians have just, by and large, bought that whole hook, line, and sinker, and just said, "Oh yeah."
Christians have been really bad defenders of this country.
Yeah, really, and they've just kind of sat back and said, "Oh no," and I think that's been detrimental to the United States for a lot of reasons, and I think it's even been harmful to atheism, because atheists aren't getting pushback from Christians on a lot of things, so the atheists aren't getting challenged. Christians don't push back at all when they're being challenged, and so Christians get weaker, and I think that has actually weakened the fundamental structure of the republic, because we have become very weak in public discourse. And one of the strengths of the United States, personally, is that for years, much like you would have been able to see in London, in Hyde Park, people would gather and they would have often heated conversations about the political and philosophical differences, and we can't even do that now.
Well, we don't have a public that could reasonably have those conversations. Like, we're not capable, not because we don't want to have them. That might also be true, but we don't have the intellectual capacity to have those conversations anymore. I think that's by design. We can't do it. And I believe Christians, by and large, are as to blame for that as any atheist philosopher was. That was the goal of the atheist philosophers, ultimately, was to get people to be that weak, not because they were atheists, but because ultimately they were Marxists. Yeah, I was going to say, I usually call most atheists state theists, because what they've done, what they've done is they've substituted the state for God. Usually, sometimes it's a little bit more abstract than the state itself. They'll substitute democracy, which is an abstract idea. Mm-hmm. But democracy is not a god. The state's not a god. But they are uncomfortable without. They need something to hold that position, and usually it's the state, and they become state theists. And if you look at it, I don't think an honest atheist can look at the founding of America and conclude that Christianity was not interwoven, like the Christian philosophies weren't interwoven into the ideas. And like, you can make arguments that Thomas Jefferson was a deist or whatever, but like, look, the founding fathers were Christian. Like, everything they do is like, they're Christians talking about morals. Of course their ideas are related to Christianity. Like they're Christians talking about, they couldn't not be related to Christianity. Right. And I do think, again, as an atheist, I do think that, like, my argument for natural rights doesn't rely on Christianity. I do think you can be an atheist and have a natural rights. You can talk about natural rights philosophically. You can talk about where rights come from and be on board with America and on board with Christians who agree that individual rights matter. And maybe their derivation of individual rights is different. And maybe we can have great arguments about that once we're actually in a world that respects individual rights. But right now, like, that view is radical.
Yeah. And we shouldn't be having that argument right now. Like, if we're over here tearing each other apart ideologically because of our difference in what the objective source of natural rights are, our individualism is, or liberty, or whatever you want to call it. If that's where we're going to get hung up in our conversation, we're not going to be effective in the fight.
Yeah, and look, the other thing that I think bothers me about a lot of atheists is, it's weird. Like, I'm an atheist hating atheist. I don't like. I do have a lot of atheist friends who I love, who are also minarchists, libertarian, or anarchist. Like, they do exist, but by and large, atheists are Marxists jerks, and
And a lot of Christians are turning into that too. So,
well, yeah, well, okay, let's step back. So here's the thing I'll say about Christianity, which maybe will piss off you and your audience. I don't know. To me, it's also very clear that Christianity is you could make a case that it's a necessary condition for a individual rights-based country. I don't think it is, but you could make a case that it is based on the U.S. was founded. Okay, fine, you can make that case. It's clearly not a sufficient belief system for that, because for like over 1,000 years.
You at that, bro.
Okay, well, look, for over 1,000 years, we didn't have that, and we had Christianity, and we have a lot of Christians today who, I get that you're saying no true Scotsman, like they're not actual Christians, but hey, they call themselves Christians. They point to the Bible. They cherry pick what they want, and they call themselves Christians. And
yeah, that's modern Western Christian culture. I would agree with you. I use the phrase. There's a big difference between a professing Christian and a confessing Christian, and I'm not going to get wrapped up in that moment of getting down to the nitty gritty of where you are doctrinally on a very particular position and go, oh well, yeah, I can reject you as a Christian, because quite frankly, the people you're talking about, just like you feel about a lot of the statheists out there, I'm over here going, no,
right,
no, please don't ever tell people that we share anything in common,
right.
And that's one of the things I appreciate about you is like we literally, despite our differences on that particular topic, have a lot in common with our own camps or how we feel about our own camps.
Yeah.
And I'll be the first person to say a lot of why we are where we are right now is because Christians have failed to keep the Republic. They failed. They were the strongest. They were had the potential to be the strongest defenders of the Republic, and they just sat by and let it get stripped away from them. They did, and I know everybody's like, "Oh, you guys are so dark. You sound defeatist." Well, and you and I might disagree a little bit on that. I personally agree with a lot of what you say about the direction we're going. Like this is coming to a head. This is absolutely coming to a head. And I think I think the darkness is good for people. I think it's actually going to wake people up, and not to be woke, but to be awake.
There's a difference.
To be awakened. I think it's going to be really good. And I don't want to get too far afield here, so I'm going to try and bring it back in. So now we've got these 4 streams that we've talked.
Can I comment on something you said earlier that I just want to? I don't.
Nope,
first
it's
of all,
my show. You can't say anything else.
I know.
Go ahead.
I'm a jerk though, so I'm going to interrupt. I don't think it's intellectually honest to hold the position that Christians founded the country but aren't also responsible for its demise.
Oh,
if you founded the country and you guys were in charge,
then
you dropped the ball. Like you had the ball. No one else could have dropped the ball.
All right.
You guys dropped the ball.
Hey, Beverly, if you watch this, hell yeah.
Right? I mean, look, I'm not denying there were enemies. I'm not denying atheists came along and people came along and like, yeah, that's true. But you guys had the ball. And specifically, the progressives of the 19th century are just the most horrendous group of people I can imagine that really steered this country. It was already problematic, but man, did they do a number on this country.
Well, here's what I would, and I'll bring us a little full circle as I start to try and steer this back towards how you ended up as a volunteerist, anarcho-capitalist. Yeah. But because I think this all plays into what we've been talking about. I mentioned the word, we were talking about deconstructionism. I mentioned the word nice earlier, right? And I actually on a couple of weeks ago, I brought up the fact that everybody has this vision of Jesus being nice, right? And so Christians have adopted nice Jesus, because the scriptures
hippie Jesus.
The scriptures tell us that we're supposed to be molded and shaped into the image of God, and we picture that as Jesus. And yes, I'm a Trinitarian, so I'm not denying that we are, but we're supposed to be molded and shaped in the image of Christ as we journey in our life as Christians. And so we've adopted this falsity that Jesus was nice. And like, you go and tell somebody that Jesus cleared the temple, right? And they're like, yeah, he cleared the temple out. He chased all the animals out. And I'm like, no, literally, that's not what happened. Like not once, twice Jesus cleansed the temple in a week. Or something. It's just a very short time frame. Jesus goes in, clears it, comes back, and like the whole thing is going on again. And both times he made a whip. This wasn't Jesus like ran in out of control into the temple and like was just like throwing tables around and chasing people with water pitchers. He literally took the time to fashion a whip, and he didn't chase the animals out because the animals weren't a problem. It was the people. He was using a whip, a scourge, on not like the Indiana Jones kind of whip. He was using a scourge on people and chasing them out of the temple. Don't tell me how nice Jesus was, because he wasn't nice. He was loving, but he also had some things that he was passionate about, and that's it. And this ties in. Christians have adopted the nice Jesus mentality that you can never say anything harsh. You can never say anything that people might be offended by. You can never say anything that might disaffect somebody. And if somebody identifies a particular way, then Jesus would address them where they are. No, Jesus literally told people they were nothing better than poisonous snakes, and even told somebody he'd be better off for you if you tied a stone around your neck and threw yourself into the sea. The Jesus that Christians today adhere to would say, here, let me give you a life preserver and you can go swimming for a while. That's exactly how they would do it. And that is why we've seen Christians abandon the fight. We're not 100% responsible, but we have a huge responsibility for why we are where we are today. And instead of getting mad at all those damn liberals, we need to be looking inward. Like you said earlier, we need to be looking inward and asking ourselves, wait a minute, if there's a failure here, if there's something going on and we're losing our nation, losing our republic, what have we done to contribute to that? And what are we going to do to take it back? And are you going to be willing to go out and do that in the public square and start pushing back? And you think, I don't know if you saw the news, but I think it was last night. I think it was Vail. It wasn't called. It was either Vail, Nevada, or Vail, Arizona. One of the two.
I think it was Arizona.
Vail, Arizona. We saw that the community showed up to a school board meeting, protesting the school board's mask mandate, and would not be silenced. And eventually, the entire school board resigned. They elected an entire new school board on the spot, and they undid this mask mandate. That's why this country has fallen apart, is because Christians used to be motivated enough to do things like that. And we've been playing nice for far too long because we don't understand what it means to be Christian. And in that, so I grant you. And so we've got these four streams.
Yep.
Education being corrupted, philosophy being corrupted, the idea of no responsibility due to psychological issues, whether they're valid or not, and the destruction, and I would say in particular the targeting of Judeo, especially Christian values, has led us to this place where we are now. And here you sit as an atheist saying, yeah, you're absolutely right. Those things are all valid. And we could still have a great nation if people had fought. But you're still a volunteerist or an anarcho-capitalist. And
yeah,
and
but again, like I don't
how you got where you are.
Well, I mean, I just want to clarify. I think the atheists should have replaced the ethical system with an atheist ethical system that recognized individual rights. They should have shown people, here's how to get to individual rights without God. And because they didn't, you end up with state theists.
Yeah, left a vacuum.
They left a vacuum. They raised the house. They raised the church. They raised the church and built nothing in its place. And that's predominantly 20th century atheists. And this is actually something that I appreciate about Christianity and some other religions as well, is that psychologically, the motivation, like Christians are looking to a positive integration of things in the world. How does everything come together and make sense so that we can thrive? And God is the answer. And I get that. And like, it's a positive outlook. You got to understand something about a lot of these atheists. They're not bad because they're atheists. They're atheists because they're bad. They want to destroy everything, and God was just one of the things. They destroy language, they destroy institutions, they destroy individual rights. Sure as hell they're going to destroy God while they're at it. They want to destroy everything. I mean, the deconstructionists destroyed language. They want to take the motivation is destruction, not life. And that motivation is, if I'm going to use religious terms like good and evil and like in a metaphorical sense, that's the essence of evil. It's hatred of the good for being the good. It's the motivation that you want destruction, not life. And that's what these people want. I don't know why. Maybe if they had bad childhoods, their own psychology, whatever it is, they want destruction.
It's almost like there's a passage in a book somewhere that says the darkness hates the light, but I can't think of where that may have come from.
Yeah, I don't believe it. Yeah.
Clearly you don't.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of validity to that, and I mean to the biblical. I mean, I think there's great metaphors in the Bible when I look at the Bible. So I mean, I think the metaphor of demons. I mean, I view it as a metaphor, but man, introduce the concept of demons and look around the world today and go, oh, you don't even have to believe it. You can see that's a great metaphor for what the hell's going on.
That's pretty scary. So
right.
So you're going through this, and for those of you who don't know, Carter will tell his story someday. He started out in a form of Christianity.
I did.
Yeah. That's probably another interview.
Yeah, that's a long one.
That's a long one.
Yeah.
Longer than this has already been. But I love this. This is like, everybody's like, I like your shorter videos. And I'm like, I like my longer ones. So
I like my longer ones too. I'm with you, man.
You'll get more viewers. And I'm like, no, because I do a 10-minute video and I still only get 3 minutes on average. So shut up.
Yeah.
But so you're on this journey. And so like about 25 years ago, you're like, okay, I'm a libertarian. And then like 10 years ago, you become a volunteerist. That there again doesn't happen overnight, and it's clearly affected you. It's had an impact on your. I mean, obviously, our philosophies always have an impact on our life, just like it does on culture. But like, how did you end up being a volunteerist? And for you, what is a volunteerist? Because it sounds an awful lot like individualism to me, being an individualist.
Yeah.
Because I'm an.
By the way, we could have a whole side discussion about how the word individualism and the word collectivism are completely misunderstood by most people, but that's a separate issue. Being an individualist does not mean you don't want community.
Yeah.
Community is not anti-individualism. That's just to throw that out there.
And being an individualist isn't being anti-community.
No, in fact, the whole reason we talk about rights, as we said before, was because we want community.
Right.
We want to be around other people and not live on desert islands. That's why we do have this discussion. But
I don't know. I think I might like to live on a desert island.
Well, now I do, yeah. But I mean, originally, the idea was that we were supposed to have a society.
So how do you end up as a volunteerist, and what is volunteerism for you, and how is that related to being an individualist? Okay.
Well, first of all, the caveat I'll say, which I've said before, but I like to keep saying it. I don't think politics are important right now. I really don't think it's not about the political system. So my being a voluntarist is basically irrelevant. Because I'm not pushing for anarchy tomorrow, and I don't even think it's a good idea, and blah blah blah. But yeah, I got to it basically. So individualism is, the way that I'll describe individualism philosophically is it's the primacy of the individual over the collective, and what that means is, if you want to think about this in terms of words we've been using like rights, the question is who owns the individual, right? Do you own yourself or does your community own you? And you can't have it both ways. Like at the end of the day, any decision about your life needs to be like someone gets to make that decision. And is it you or is it 51% of the people around you? You need to answer that question. And philosophically, you can answer it from basically the nature of what a group is. A group is an abstraction of a collection of individuals, and so the individual is primary, just on just conceptually primary. But you can also make moral cases for it if we talk about how you're going to get along in society. So we get to individual rights from individualism, right? Which is the page that we share. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. We get to individual rights. Now, in order for me to respect your rights, as a human, I'm going to grant you that respect by default because I'm going to assume that you understand what rights are and that you can respect mine in return. But if you violate them and demonstrate that you can't respect my individual rights, I will stop respecting your individual rights. So if you shoot at me, I'll shoot back, right? Like, and I should. I no longer have to respect your person. You've demonstrated that you won't respect mine or someone else's, right? And so, if we start asking this question of, all right, well, what's the nature of violating some individual rights? You get to answers that sound more libertarian, like, okay, the initiation of the use of force. Fraud actually is a specific case of the initiation of use of force, which we don't have to talk about at the moment, but it's a faking of reality. And anyway, so you get to this initiation of the use of force. Now, the use of force, it's the use of force. It's not the initiation of force. If I say, if I have a gun and I point it at you and say, I will kill you if you don't give me your wallet, I haven't used force. I mean, I haven't employed the force, but I'm using the concept of force.
You've already initiated force at that point.
Right. I've initiated the use of force. I haven't used force. Like, I haven't done the forceful thing, but I've brought force into the relationship. I brought it into the relationship and I used it against you.
Absolutely. Yeah,
so that's the initiation. So I say, okay, great. So we start to look at these concepts and we say, okay, well, we want a society in which individual rights are respected. Now, the reason I throw politics away basically at this point is the realization that, well, you can't have that if people don't respect individual rights, so culture matters, and I have that. But if we're going to go down the political angle now, we say, okay, great. We want a society in which people respect individual rights. We can initiate the use of force against one another. How do we build such a society? How does such a society come to exist? And the default assumption that people make is, well, there's got to be a government to do it. We need an authority. Someone needs to make sure we don't violate each other's individual rights. Someone. Okay? If we were in the 1956 film, The Day the Earth Stood Still, I would vote for Gort. Gort was the robot who would retaliate if you initiated the use of force. And Gort, if he was perfectly programmed, which obviously nowadays Google would own Gort and he would not be perfectly programmed. But Skynet. If you were... What?
Skynet!
Right, he would be Skynet now. Yeah, now he would be the Terminator. But in that movie, right, he was programmed to respond to the use of force. Okay. If such an authority existed, I would consent to having that authority manage society for us. I would be like, I am all in, right? If you've got a Gort that can like run around Earth and perfectly manage this, I'm down. Here's the issue. We don't have a Gort. We have real people. And the only way to build, so if you want to create a government, you have to give authority to some people. And there's no way to do that philosophically unless each and every person agrees to it individually, like when they're 18. Like you can't actually, I never agreed to be subject to the laws of the United States. I was born here. There's no such thing as a social contract. Contracts don't exist where one party doesn't get to negotiate, look at the contract, decide whether to sign it. Like, that's not a thing. The word contract is completely invalid there.
That sounds almost like, I don't know, indentured servitude.
Right. So the question's like, okay, how are we going to build this magical society? And you would say, well, we have to make sure the right people are in charge. Okay, fine.
Who gets to define that?
That's the problem.
Right.
Who gets to define who those people are? And you can say, well, we have democracy and vote. Okay, well, look.
Yeah,
clearly voting does not get you good. Like, voting does not give you individual right. You don't get a good government because you let people vote. That's obvious. So,
well, de Tocqueville said something along that line, and I'm going to paraphrase because I'll botch it all to heck, but he said the question isn't whether or not, a good man could be elected in the United States. The question is whether or not a good man would run for office and whether or not people would actually vote for him. And that's his.
He wouldn't run for office.
Right. He wouldn't. And that's not to disparage. There are probably some people out there somewhere who are.
Sure, I love Ron Paul too, but in general.
Yeah, there's Carter got his plug in.
No, I mean, look, he's the only politician that I'm like, that guy was good.
Yeah, and there's just this reality in that like he recognized that, as he's coming over to study democracy in America, literally, and we, and we're going, no, we're a republic, but he's coming over here to study this new idea, and it was really a new concept for the world. And he's trying to study this and see how to bring this to bear on European, rule and whatnot. And he's just amazed that even that quickly after the United States Republic arose, they were already going, oh, let's put this person in position of power. We don't really care if they're ethically or morally corrupt or bankrupt or whatever. We're just going to put them in power because, gosh, they're going to do what we want. And and now you've lost. And
right.
And I was having this conversation with somebody earlier this evening, talking about, the how certain people in elected positions today aren't interested in doing what's right anymore, no matter how uncomfortable it is. In the argument was made, well, they're trying to balance both views. They're trying to balance the left and they're trying to balance the right and please everybody. And I get that. I understand that. But the issue is when you get elected into a position, if you're really ruling, and I don't even like to use that word, but if you're really ruling the way that you're supposed to, constitutionally, let's take Christianity and all that other stuff out of it. Let's just constitutionally, if you're really ruling the way you're supposed to, the way the people have appointed you to, you're going to do the right thing no matter how hard it is, no matter how many people it upsets. You're going to do the right thing. But we don't.
And then you won't get reelected.
Right, and then you won't get reelected, or you do, but you're under constant barrage of attack for it. And that is so fundamentally true of, like, who gets to decide who's the right person for office. And if your side is winning for now, that might be great, but what happens when the other side wins?
Well, and I think fundamentally, but people need to understand what government is. And this is the thing that clicked for me. Government is the initiation of the use of force. That's what it is. It is a monopoly on the initiation of the use of force. That's what it is.
You're a radical. Like, how dare you speak truth, sir?
So, I mean, look, it's funny though. You get this thing, and people think like, well, how could we do the government without taxes? Well, look, we didn't have them until 1913. We didn't have a Federal Reserve either. Like, you guys, like, this stuff isn't all this apparatus isn't actually necessary. You know, the fact that we're more modern and we have iPhones doesn't mean we suddenly need a Federal Reserve. So, like, this, the thing is, the government is this initiation of the use of force. You are putting into the hands of someone the power to use force against other people without, not in retaliation, like through initiation. And, you know, that undermines the very principle we're talking about, right? It undermines the very rights we're trying to protect. And people don't like this kind of thing when I say this, but look, what happens if you work all day, every day for 365 days a year, and 100% of your money goes to the government, and if you don't pay it, men with guns show up at your house and throw you in jail, so you have to pay it. You pay 100% of your money, and they give you stipends or whatever. They subsidize things. What are you?
Sounds like you might be a servant.
Yeah, I would say you're a slave.
Slave, yep. I mean,
okay, so they give you housing and food, but slaves got housing and food. Okay, so you're a slave. You're a slave.
And then try to break out of that system and see what happens.
Right. So now my question is, okay, what if it's 99%?
Right.
Are you still a slave? I think most people will be like, yeah, okay, fine. What if it's 1%? Well, I guess you're much less of a slave, but at the end of the day...
Try not to pay that 1% and see what happens.
That's right. Try not to pay it. You'll find out really quickly who owns your life, and it's not you. You don't own your life. And if you don't own your life, if you can't go exchange goods with your next door neighbor, if you can't grow corn in your backyard, pick it and exchange it for money with your next door neighbor without involving a third party, you don't own your life.
Right. You know, and the funny thing is too, is that what you just said, I have been saying, as you know, and that kind of stuff will get you in trouble. That'll get you in trouble for pointing that out. People will hate it. People will absolutely hate it.
It's an uncomfortable fact.
And it drives people crazy. And it's literally considered radical thought. And that's why people, hate when you bring up, being an ANCAP or, a minarchist or whatever. They hear that anarchy thing and they're out there going, look, this person's advocating for just violence in the street. They want a violent overthrow. Right. And like literally, are there anarchists and that's revolutionary anarchism? That's, it's communist, Marxist anarchism is what it really is, because its end goal is ultimately authoritarianism. They just want to overthrow what's there now and replace it with their own form. And that's not real anarchism.
Let me just clarify. I view anarchy like the word atheist. Atheist means not a belief in God.
Yeah.
It doesn't say what you do believe in.
Right.
Right? Like, you're an atheist with respect to Zeus. You don't believe in him.
I agree 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, an anarchist just means I don't want a coercive force called the state that have a monopoly on the initiation of use of force. I don't want that. It doesn't mean also I want the chaos of Attila the Hun and I think Chaz is a great idea. It doesn't mean that. It means I don't want this thing over here. One of the reasons I'm not pushing for anarchy is because if we had anarchy thrown on our lap, we wouldn't get the society I want right now. That's for sure. We would get a hellhole. That's why, to me, the whole political question is moot.
They call that Detroit, by the way. They call that Detroit, by the way.
Yeah, right, yeah. The Detroit is the hellhole after it's been scorched. But yeah.
No, so here...
this is why the politics is a moot point, as far as I'm concerned. And the political system question is a moot point. If we all get into society, if we get to a point where culturally we care about individual rights, I guarantee you it'll be much easier to have a discussion about smaller governments, and people can argue we don't need this and we don't need that, and it'll be a much more... And by the way, if we had a minarchist state, I might theoretically think anarchy was better, but I wouldn't give a crap. Like, what's the big? It's not a big difference. Like, it wouldn't be a huge difference. It wouldn't bother me too much. What we need is a culture of individualists. That's what we need.
Well, and I think the reason why, a lot of people are scared by the idea of what you're talking about is that they've been born into this system of servitude. They've been born into the system
Right.
of they even the people who would consider themselves individualists have been born into a collectivist system. Now, it, there are a lot of ways, and like that'd probably be a completely different interview or conversation, if you would. Um, but no matter which way you look at collectivism, we've been born in the United States. You're born into this collectivist mentality that everything that you do and everything about you is about the public good. You have this responsibility to be doing good for the public, and and it we're going to make sure that you do it because we have the right to the initiation of force.
And there's an expectation that there's an authority figure who will take care of you. You don't have to worry about the where the meat comes from that you buy at the store because the FDA will make sure you're taken care of. You don't have to worry about what you put in your body, where you send your kids, like all of that someone else. You've outsourced everything just like a farm animal.
Right, exactly. And we're born into that. And we're born into that mentality. And when you start to it's like the guy who has spent his entire life by no fault of his own having to live in some form of environment, whether it be on a hospital bed or in some sort of chamber, who has been told you have to be in this because without it you're going to die. And you start to talk to him about exploring the outside world and tell him, hey, look, there's sunshine and there's rain and there's fresh air and there's flowers and there's scents, and he's terrified of that because all he knows is a sterile, controlled environment.
Right.
And you keep,
Right.
but then you kind of crack the window a little bit, and he's like, well, what's that smell? And you're like, oh, that's chamomile, or I don't know, whatever.
You have chamomile outside your window. Good.
It's like, I don't know. It's whatever it is, and then he gets that kind of that smell. It's like, what's that? And you're like, well, that's a skunk. Well, that's interesting. And then the next day he's like, well, what's that sound? And like, well, that's rain. What's that smell from the rain? Well, that's what rain smells like. And he's like, oh, it's kind of scary. But the more you talk about it and the more you expose him to it, pretty soon he's ready. He's ready to go out there and experience it. The problem is nobody's going to let somebody talk to them the way you and I would need to talk to them about their individualist mentality to get away from that collectivism, because even the patriotic types are like, well, we need somebody there to take care of us. And I've been saying this for a long time. Like, one of my favorite scenes in any book ever is the end of Animal Farm. And I know what I knew as soon as I said, but I say this, I'll walk into a room, I'll see something happening, and I'll shake my head and I go, the pigs look like the people. And everybody around me goes, what? I don't get it. It's like, did you read Animal Farm? Yep. I'm like, did you pay attention to it? Nope. And it's, you get to the end of Animal Farm and all the animals are gathered around the human house, the farmer's house, and there are the pigs, and they're looking through that back window, right? And the pigs are drinking alcohol and they're wearing hats and they're sitting at a table and they're playing cards. And as the animals are watching, they're looking around and they can't tell a difference between the pigs and the people.
Right.
And that's where we are in that downstream from cult or from philosophy and culture as politics is. It doesn't matter who you put in office. I know this is going to upset some of my friends. Is Trump better than Biden? Yeah, but ultimately, is he any different in the sense that he was still in that position of power and people were still waiting for him to come and fix everything for them? And that was what January 6th was all about. We need to keep him there because he's going to protect our way of life. No, he's not. He's not. Donald Trump was not interested in protecting your way of life. He wasn't interested in that. And people they've invested everything into politicians, into political figures, because we've been raised to think that they are the ones who are going to make everything better. And yet when you go out and you live an individualist life, yes, there are different things in place that are you can't really avoid the taxes that you pay at the gas pump, and you can't avoid the taxes you pay on your clothing or your fast food that you treat yourself to or poison yourself with, depending on how you look at it. But whatever it might, unless it's Chick-fil-A, but whatever you're looking at, you're not going to be able to avoid some of that stuff. But you go out and you're just doing your day-to-day individualist thing, and there's nobody standing over your shoulder telling you've got to do this here and you got to do that there, and if you don't do this, then that'll happen. And you just go out and you do your thing, and you live your life like an individualist, and you don't realize just how much you don't need somebody controlling you.
Well, so I mean, talking about psychology, that's a scary thing for a lot of people. With freedom comes responsibility, which I know sounds cliche, but there's something scary about moving. I mean, this is how kids are supposed to grow up, although they don't. You're supposed to leave the nest and be on your own. Instead, we leave the nest and we have a different daddy, which is the government taking care of us. And it's really hard. I don't actually think it's possible to break adults from that kind of state of dependence. They are used to it. It's everything they know. It's absolutely terrifying to them to say, well, you're responsible for yourself now. They don't want freedom. Right. They want the cage. They want to be farm animals. And
well, here I'll challenge.
I don't think you can talk them out of that. You can raise kids who don't want that, but you can't talk adults out of that very easily.
You're right that they don't want freedom, and so it's not really a challenge. I agree with you 100%. It's not that they don't want liberty. They don't want the freedom to actually be individuals. They want freedom, even the supposed conservatives. They want the freedom for the consequences of their decision making.
Right. When I say they don't want freedom, what I mean is you can tell they don't want freedom because they don't want the responsibility. What you should measure is, and actually, this is that it relates to an adage at work. You want to get something done, you give it to the person who's the busiest, because they're the ones taking on responsibility, actually getting stuff done. Like, you look for the people who take personal responsibility. Those are the free people. Those are the people who want freedom. They're the ones taking personal responsibility. The ones who are trying to evade responsibility don't want freedom either.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and that's every work environment. And like you said, you always know the one who's like he's out there getting paid the same amount, or she, or Z, or Zer, as I don't know, whatever. It's the person. No wait, that has the word son in it. I'm like, we're gonna have to ask Trudeau what I'm supposed to say there.
Yeah. We like to say people. I don't know.
But it's the person who goes into a work environment, gets paid the same as everybody else around them, and maybe gets paid less, and is over there going, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll take care of this, I'll take care of that, I'll take care of that. And everybody's like, get out of the way and let them do it all, and they get paid the same. And
a well-managed place of work, I've hired hundreds of people, the well-managed place of work, that's recognized, and that person gets the freedom of a promotion. Like, that person gets more autonomy as a result.
Used to.
Yeah.
Meritocracy is dead, Carter.
I know. Well, apparently meritocracy is white supremacy. I've read that recently. I want to say this to your conservative audience, because I was a conservative before I was a libertarian. I get what it's like to be a conservative. I'm just going to ask you a question. In my life, I'm 46, as we said.
Are you asking me, or are you asking my audience?
Your audience, because I don't think you're a conservative, right?
I would fall more into the paleo-conservative camp, which has probably got far more in common with classical libertarianism than. I mean, somebody said, well, paleo-conservatives gave rise to all the alt-right, and I'm like,
everything gave rise to all alt-right. It's all right. Well, you can answer this then. In my life, looking back, what have the conservatives conserved?
Which is precisely why I'm a paleo-conservative. because and you'll hear me say that the reactionary conservative and Fox News conservatives, the I'm going to vote Republican because I'm a conservatives, they've done nothing. The only thing, and this is for all of my tens and tens of I'll probably get several tens of viewers because Carter's on, and I'll get even more.
You might lose some viewers. Who knows?
I'll get more when Carrie comes on. She's cuter than you.
Yes, agreed.
And she's a little nicer. But I'm going to try.
Absolutely, she's not just a little nicer.
So here's what conservatives have done. Honestly, the conservatives, and if you want to say Republicans, if you will, all that they've conserved is their own power. That's it. They've conserved their own power. They have conserved their own positions, and they have conserved the status quo. That's it. That's it. And that is, I'm gonna throw this out there. 98% of the people in elected positions, elected servants, and I talk about I don't say elected officials anymore. They're supposed to be servants. They're supposed to be public servants, elected and appointed. They have done is they have increased and preserved and conserved the status quo on both sides of the aisle, if you will. I don't think
they've preserved the status quo at all.
Well,
Michael Malice is famous for saying conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit, and I don't think there's a better description of conservatism than that.
Yeah, it's like conservatives of today, the reactionary types are like fundamentalist Baptists. They're always about 15 to 20 years behind culture.
Sure. So they put the brakes on it, but they don't stop it.
Right. No, it's not. They don't even try to put the brakes on. They're just trying to not be whatever's happening way up there.
Right.
They never put the brakes on. They're not trying to pull it back. They're just trying not to be what's going on up there. So that when they get up to where that was then, they're still behind whatever's way up there. And that's it. And that's why you don't see me jumping on board when somebody goes, "Oh, this person's going to be a great candidate." No, let me talk to them. Would you be willing to do this? Would you be willing to do that? Well, I don't know. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? It's like, that's it. It's absolutely true. And and frankly, that's been one of my struggles looking at what the Libertarian Party as a whole in the United States has had to offer.
Well, they're dysfunctional.
Joe Jorgensen was not the person to put forward. It was
no. And they're just a joke. I mean, I hate to say that because I know I'm supposed to have a soft spot for them, but what a joke of a how are libertarians going to get taken seriously with the Libertarian Party as what they are? It's a joke.
And I say the same thing for people who identify. Listen to me, I'm all culturally right now. Who identify as Republican, but
you can actually identify as Republican. You can't identify as female, but you can identify as Republican. That's a thing.
That's a thing. I didn't know if I thought maybe
I'm guessing.
Maybe I thought it was appropriating somebody's culture. But the people are out there. Well, I'm a Republican. Why? Well, I always have been. Why? Well, because I'm a conservative. What's that mean?
They don't know.
And you get that with the Democrats. You get that with the Libertarians. And sometimes a Libertarian can tell you exactly what they mean by it, and other times they're like, "Well, I want drugs legalized." That's your entire platform.
That's such a. I mean, I think they should be legal too, but really, is that the priority of all the things going wrong in society? That's the one that's really. That's your bee in your bonnet. Is that?
And even the phrase for someone like you, and even for me, the phrase of something being legal.
Yeah. Well,
what makes it legal or illegal? Is.
Here's the thing. Think about this. Bill Clinton from the 90s, as horrible as he was, and I remember thinking he was a radical leftist crazy in the 90s. I was around.
Yeah.
He's more conservative than Trump was. Oh, for sure. This is what the conservatives have done. The right is the biggest, they're the most panty-waisted, weakest defenders of our liberties. If I was the left, what better enemy to have than the pathetic conservatives and Republicans? they're a joke. They're easy. All they care about is getting elected, as you said. And they've bought into, here's the thing. They don't know how to philosophically stand up on principle against the left. They've bought into this pragmatist idea. By the way, pragmatism is like, to me, pragmatism is this, it's like the AIDS virus. It's this horrible infection into philosophical discourse. There's nothing good about pragmatism. It's literally a logical fallacy. Like, it's a fallacy of the golden middle. It's a fallacy. The compromise between two things is not the right thing. One of my favorite Ayn Rand quotes, and any compromise between food and poison, only death will win. The Republicans have, and their conservatives have, no ability to stand on principle and say, no, we're about individual rights. This is why the purpose of the government is to protect individual rights. We need to roll back this, and this. These are violations of rights. We're going to stand on principle. People have a right to do this. They have a right to do that, blah, blah, blah. This is where it comes from. Our country was founded on protecting them, and have that debate. Almost none of them, I mean, Ron Paul will put as an exception, none of them can have that debate, nor do they want to have that debate. They just want to be kind of popular, get invited to the right cocktail parties, put the brakes on some of the progressivism a little bit, so they're not quite as crazy as the radical left. And they've done absolutely nothing. The Republicans are the reason we're in the state we're in now, because they're always going to be enemies of liberty. It's the defenders of liberty that you hold accountable for defending it. And they were the defenders, and they have failed miserably. They are the worst. They are, and if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say they're subverters. They're subverters of liberty. If I really wanted to be conspiratorial, I would say they know what they're doing. Their job is to be controlled opposition, to make it look like there's something slowing the left, when in fact, we all know inevitably we're going to Marx, and that's the plan.
You mean the pigs look like the people?
Yes.
And I think that's what has so many people right now scared, because to some degree the veneer is off.
Yeah,
the veneer is off.
It is.
And they're like, these are the people I trusted for so long, so they see a
shame on you.
Right, exactly. They see a Marjorie Taylor Greene come into the House of Representatives and look like she's just a crackpot, because she's over here going, look at that, and look at that, and that needs to change, and that needs to change, and we need to do something about that. And then all of a sudden, they're trying to expel her from the House, and people are like, see, I knew she was weird. I'm like, yeah, that should tell you she's good people, like,
yeah, that's an endorsement of her.
That's an endorsement. It's like the person who like dares to challenge somebody in a public position, who all of a sudden everybody's after, trying to get them deplatformed and canceled and all that kind of stuff, and like, oh no, that person's not a radical. That's a person you should be looking up to. And it's like Ted Cruz, like he was part of the insurrection on January 6th. We need to get him out of the House. Really? Like that?
I hate that word. I'm going to call every BLM riot from now on an insurrection. I can't stand the application of that word to January 6th.
I agree. And I adamantly oppose what happened on January 6th, but it was not an insurrection. So you get a Ted Cruz who then goes down to the border and shows up with a camera, and then some little, like, I don't know what she was, some sort of aide or whatever, is like standing there trying to stop him from exposing what he's been talking about for years. And everybody's like, he had no right to do that. I'm like, that guy's a hero. Like, he was like, and that's what, like, and there's people on the right who are over there going, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's one of those QAnon people. She's, look, who cares? What she's doing is right. And you're over here going, we got to stop her. Like, do you understand what you've done? You have literally capitulated to the very thing you say you hate. Because pragmatism, and that's for my Christian friends out there in your pragmatic ways, no matter what it would be. But even in your pursuit of conservative politics, voting for the lesser of two evils is still voting for evil. Like it's as Carter's been saying, it might pump the brakes a little bit, but it's still heading in the same direction. What you need is you need to find that car or that train or whatever that's going the opposite direction of the way culture is going right now. And like, even if there's a great risk to your life from jumping from one car to the other, you need to jump onto the car, even if it means you end up on the tracks underneath the car as it's going by. That's better than the direction we're going now. And staying aligned with the people that you've been aligned with for all of these years is only going to end up destroying you. And I think, that's kind of what you've been saying for quite a while through your podcast and your show and all that other stuff.
I mean, look, I'm black pilled. I had a conversation with my audience last week, like trying to black pill people, but I'm not pessimistic about it. And you may disagree with me about this, but America's over. It's over. This is not like the ideas aren't over. There's plenty of people who love the ideas.
I'm fighting for the ideas.
Yeah, that's what I'm fighting for. I don't really care what our political boundaries are and our borders, and like I don't care about that. I don't care which states are a part of it. It's the ideas that make us special and make us valuable. Like, it's the ideas that are important. And the idea of America is not over. There are a hell of a lot of people in the United States who love the idea of America. But America itself as a political entity, as a political entity is over. It's over. The radical left has achieved, the crazy Marxists have achieved power, and they've basically achieved critical mass. You will see them start to roll out every method they can to make sure that they maintain power. They are reinstituting CRT and pushing childhood education, which will, I guarantee, involve indoctrination to make sure future generations are solidified. This ideology is solidified in the minds of your children and future generations. They are talking now about making DC a state. DC is like 90-something% Democrat. I'm sure they'll try and bring Puerto Rico on. They're going to try and grant citizenship or some sort of amnesty to all of the illegal immigrants who are here, who I don't have a problem with people from other countries. I'm married to someone from another country, but they are by and large not freedom-loving, liberty-minded individualists, right? They are from populations who are much more willing to accept socialism and authoritarianism. They're going to become part of the country. They are doing everything they can. We already have Google, Facebook, Twitter. They're all on board with this. Trump was your last hurrah, guys. Trump was your last ditch effort to do something radical and change things, and he didn't do it. He talked a big talk.
And it had nothing to do with losing the election. And people have got to get that through their heads. Trump didn't succeed in doing what they wanted him to do long before that election ever came around. Did people still vote for him? Do I believe there may have been some nefarious activity during the 2020 election? Absolutely. But Trump didn't fail because he didn't get a second term. Trump had failed before the second term.
Right.
And we have got to understand that. I think if we could just get people to understand that, we could get more people to cling on to the idea of the idea of American greatness, the ideals behind America, without being so attached to the idea of saving geopolitical America, because that's what I'm fighting for. I'm not fighting for these things so that I can say, oh, we've got these 50 states and they're all individual state democracies.
I'm not like, no, I really need to be in the country that Massachusetts is in. Like, I don't care.
And I'm not over here going, I need to be in the country where California is. I'm like, honestly.
Yeah, well, I don't need to be in that country either, but that's a separate issue. Yeah.
But it's, for me, I'm fighting for the ideals. The ideals. That's why you don't hear me when not that you have time to watch me, but those who do. I mean, it's like I'm fighting for the ideals that built the republic that we had. I'm fighting for those ideals because those ideals can go anywhere and survive and be successful. if people would just take their minds away from and out of the mindset that we have to have these overlords over us. And
Right.
if they actually knew what the Constitution said, even with the implementation of the three branches of government, the Constitution was not establishing that idea of the initial initiation of force of just being the presence of government. It was establishing those things so that there was at the center for lack of better terminology, structure. But they never intended it to be what it is today at all, not at all. And
all the founding fathers would be beside themselves at this.
There's not a one of them. Even the ones that were on disparate positions on certain things would be just absolutely sickened by what they're seeing.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to get people to understand. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, is because, people hear terminology like, capitalism is obviously evil still today, and meritocracy is.
No one knows what that means either, but okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, there's crony capitalism. They all understand that, but
right.
But meritocracy is dead, or it's white supremacy. Grammar is now white supremacy too. But they hear anarchy. They've got a picture of Antifa. Like literally, that's what they picture.
Understandably,
they see Antifa and they think that's anarchy. And genuine anarchy is a disbelief in a central state. That's it. And it's a belief in your community, not communitarianism, but your community should be, if I understand you correctly, because this is how I see it, your community should be where we decide what is good for us and what is bad for us, as it relates to the individual.
I think you would, in the kind of, I hate when people ask me, how would such and such work in anarchy? It's like, well, I don't know. If I asked you 40 years ago, how would this iPhone get constructed? Like, tell me the supply chain and exactly what it's going to look like. I don't know. That's why we have free markets and people coming up with ideas. But I do think we would see at the community level, I think we would see something actually very similar to the town structure that we have now. You could imagine totally voluntarily, you could imagine people getting together, say, because by the way, this already happens in some spots, people getting together and buying land and saying, hey, let's all agree right now, there's only 10 of us. Let's start a town. There's 10 of us. Let's all agree to these rules, and let's agree to these rules and commit to these rules. There's some rules that we want in our town, and we're gonna write encumbrances on our property titles for these rules.
It's called a covenant.
Right. And we're gonna have encumbrances, and we're gonna agree to them, and we're gonna agree that the encumbrances move forward with the land. And you would end up with little jurisdictions with little rules that are unique to that jurisdiction. And if they weren't working, obviously there'd be some there might be a mechanism to change it or whatever. But I think you would end up with what you wouldn't end up with is a bunch of guys in Washington telling you can't buy a Glock 43 because you live in California. That you wouldn't end up with.
Unless your particular community was full of hippies who ate granola, but
but it wouldn't be Washington telling you that. It would be your hippie community. You could move to a different hippie community, and look, I'm all about experimentation in a completely anarchic, voluntarist society. The hippies and their buddies are totally allowed to go form a commune in, some county somewhere, and as long as people voluntarily sign up, they can go share all their granola with each other and sing kumbaya and have their hippie commune. And if it works out really well, good for them.
But what they're not allowed to do is to come from their community, surround your community for 40 days in a siege until you agree to accept them in and adopt their way of thinking. And that's exactly what's happening.
Right. They're not allowed to take my stuff.
Right.
They can have their commune, but I don't want to join.
Exactly. And that's exactly the problem that the United States is having today, is that we're now having a minority of people sitting in positions of power, telling the majority of people how they're to live their day-to-day lives. And that is not the principle that this country was founded on, that this republic was founded on. And ultimately, we, pushing to the ideals that built this country it's gonna look far more like what you would have than what we had even 50 years ago, and where people are right now. It would
Oh,
be.
I guarantee if Thomas Jefferson were part of this conversation and we were saying, do you want what we have now or anarchy? He would be like, give me that anarchy crap you're talking about. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, he might actually even use the word crap. So
He would be like, all right, I'm down.
yeah, absolutely.
Because this is the opposite of what they wanted. It's the opposite of what they wanted. It's nothing to do with what they wanted. Nothing.
Right, absolutely. And that's why I wish people would understand. Like, so when you hear somebody who says, "Well, I'm a minarchist," and a lot of the people I know have no idea what any of this is, but I want them to be exposed to this. I want them to go out there and start looking this stuff up, because this is what's going to save this nation. The ideal, not the
Right.
the ideal. When the tens and tens of you, when you hear me talk about fighting for what this country is, I'm not talking about the political system. Are there people in the political system that need to be resisted? Absolutely. Are there little tiny mini tyrants and despots all over in the political system? Yeah, pretty much every mayor, every county board, and
Go to the DMV. I mean, you don't have to go to a mayor.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
They're everywhere. There's little despots and little tyrants everywhere. Appointed and elected, they're everywhere. When I talk about resisting them, I'm not talking about overthrowing them and in a war. I'm talking about, we don't need them. We don't need them. They need us. And they count on our compliance. And that's what Carter's been saying, and that's what I've been saying for a long time. They count on our compliance. And without our compliance, without our willingness to do everything they say, which is not patriotic, by the way. It is not patriotic to follow every directive given from some person on high. If that's not patriotism, and as I've been saying for a long time, patriotism is questioning everything that they say and asking, is this valid? Is this constitutional? Is this what this republic was built on? We don't need them. They need us. And we see that over and over and over again. Carter, you brought up taxes. The federal income tax was supposed to be temporary, but it got permanentized. It got made permanent in this country at the will of the people.
There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
The taxes were made, and we adapted to that. And now it's just commonplace. And you think that we don't adapt quickly to things. I want you to look around this country right now. A year ago today, the vast majority of states, the vast majority of cities, the vast majority of counties did not have mask mandates. A year ago today. But now, not even a full year into mask mandates, when you walk into a store or you're out in public and you see somebody wearing a mask, you're like, oh, that's pretty normal. But when you see that person standing next to you at the local gas station or whatever, not wearing a mask, you smile, because that person doesn't look like all the sheep around him. So you don't think that you're going to adapt to every little thing that comes your way? You're crazy, because most of you, sadly, are collectivists. You're
Right.
collectivists. Carter,
Right.
We've been at this.
This is on a long one, yeah.
Yeah, we've been at this for a while. I might have to break this into a couple of parts. So what I want you to do, Carter, is I want you to give me not a rant, because we know how your rants go. I'll be here. You start ranting, I'm going to go get a drink. So no,
I was going to say I need a drink.
What I want from you, Carter, one, I want you to understand how much I appreciate this. This has been a long time.
This is fun. I enjoy these conversations. So
this has been a long time coming for me. I've been wanting to do this, on my channel with you for quite a while. But so no, I appreciate your time, because I know you got a young family. They're probably all in bed by now. So, but what I want you
should be is the
yes, right.
Yeah.
Mine are all old enough now where they're like, we're just going to bed, Dad. So, what I would love you to do is to sum up as succinctly and as briefly as you can, because I know how you are. One thing that you would want true patriotic Americans, no matter what their political ideology and their philosophical positions to be, these truly patriotic Americans who love the idea of America. If you could compel them to do something or to think about something, what would you compel them towards?
Homeschool.
Oh, well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Carter Lair of Unsafe Space. That was the shortest answer I've gotten from anybody in history. No, homeschool. And give me a brief statement as to why.
Your child is better off if you put them in the backyard and ignore them for 12 years than if you send them to government schools. The government schools are not teaching. They're actively destroying the ability to think, and they're creating a compliant population. And it's child abuse to send your child to a government school. Throw them in the backyard and ignore them if you don't have time to teach them. Give them Khan Academy and some internet resources, and block the bad sites
And
let them go. You could do a much better job than that, homeschooling. But your child, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to raise someone who's not going to bring more Marxism and collectivism into the world. You have a responsibility to raise someone who's going to fight this and is going to be a good member of a, dare I say, voluntarist or individualist-based society. And you can't shirk that responsibility by passing it off to some, poorly paid government worker who doesn't know what the word individualism means and is just worried about her paycheck and is probably going to teach critical race theory because she was told to. That is, it's not only is it child abuse to your kid, it is really kind of rude to the rest of us.
Yeah. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is Carter from Unsafe Space. If you're not tuning into, what do you guys have now? You have two live shows a week, guaranteed. You have one on Monday and one on Friday. Friday is more of a free-for-all, where you bring in radical comics and famous Hollywood people and other randos to come in to be more of a kind of, so you and Carrie can let your hair down a little bit. Monday is your more serious, in-depth, let's talk about culture and the societal woes that we've been dealing with for the weekend. And then you kind of have deprogrammed, and you have some stuff about the Great Reset that I what do you got, 4 or 5 different things during the week?
Yeah, we're starting to build more programming. Right now we have the Covfefe break, which is Monday and Friday, which you mentioned. That's me and Carrie. Carrie's now doing Deprogrammed without me as much as possible, which I think is good. Deprogrammed is just so focused on social justice issues. We have Ian, who does the Great Reset videos. We actually have a nascent Tactical Truth series, which a friend of mine is going to start teaching. I once in a while swoop in and do an interview or some other kind of monologue type of thing, and Carrie once in a while does that as well. I think she had a live stream today earlier with the Quartering, who's a YouTube guy. So yeah, but we're expanding our programming as much as we possibly can. We're trying to make it not just Carter and Carrie, but a lot of like-minded people doing specific things. So the Great Reset is a specific topic that's talked about every week.
So you got to meet Carter, those of you who aren't familiar with who he is, and you'll get to meet Carrie. She promised she would come on and tell me about her journey from social justice warrior to warrior for Jesus now. Carter's going to love that one.
Yeah, she was atheist SJW, and now Christian. I think she still calls herself
she's
liberal, I think. Yeah. But she's very cognizant of the difference between where she is and modern leftists.
Yeah.
So.
And she's got a really interesting story to tell as well. So check out their channel. You guys, they don't need my promotion.
No. But you can. We're Unsafe Space, so you can go.
They're on my website, by the way, for resources to check out, and literally as a resource. So, Carter, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, man. It was good. It was a good show. I enjoyed the conversation.